enormous flight, not just of so-called white people, but of everybody. And so it's a very strange thing where everybody says DEI, 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 but they
Oh
don't
my
want to live
God.
under
And
a
let's get
DEI city
Stephen
council or
J.
mayor or
James
state
back
because
on
they
the
feel they're
show.
racist
Stephen J.
and
James, what's
they are
going on,
not.
my brother?
Hey, Luke. Thank you for bringing me on. How are you?
I'm excellent. Good to hear from you.
Excellent. Look, what I'd first like to do is just complain about the state of Bluetooth. That's not exactly what I came on for, but I'm having trouble with my Bluetooth headphones.
You
Don't just
sound
hate
fine.
Bluetooth. Don't
sound
just
fine,
hate
bro.
it though, Luke. How many times do you also have a problem with? I think I'm speaking to the audience here. Bluetooth sucks, doesn't it? We actually need, forget AI, we need an improvement in Bluetooth technology. But anyway,
We need
So,
a
on the
spiritual
top-
transformation so Bluetooth doesn't bother us as intensely.
it's a bother, isn't it? Who can get a set of Bluetooth headphones just to connect when you want them to? Anyway, my goodness. Look, whilst you were talking about this issue on the college campuses and that, I just had one thought that came into my mind, and it was that whilst you're doing this like fair dinkum show about all this and trying to do it, you know, about a fair show about each side and different people have different gifts and here's a bit of Victor David Hansen and all this, don't you just wish that like we could go back to 2018 and Brundlefly could storm in here and say like, but why do we have to put up with all this bullshit anyway in our own country? Why are these groups why having these inter-ethnic fights in our country? Why do we have to put up with it?
Yeah, you think I'd be happier having like 1,000 live viewers right now, like the glory days, and having rambunctious discussions like we used to have in the glory days of internet blood sports? Yeah, I do miss it.
Yeah. So I watched some of your live stream when you went to the protest, which I think, did it turn violent after you were there? Right?
Yeah, there. I mean, but violence is probably an overstatement. There was a little bit of violence. I mean, there's a little bit of violence in a normal act of sex. So,
Well, okay, yeah. Okay.
right, it's penetration, right? And so there was some penetration of the pro-Palestine and pro-Jewish sides.
Right, yeah.
I mean, how much violence goes on when you engage in the act of love?
Well, let's keep this on topic, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, for legal reasons too, of course.
Yes.
Let's
Disavow.
so for during that live stream, then what I was struck by is obviously you were on the Jewish side, but you did venture over to the Palestinian side. And what was your take on those people?
My take was that the conduct on both sides was either even, or my side was, there was reason to believe that my side might have even behaved worse.
You think both sides were trying to provoke each other? Is that was
there was some of that, but I was biased. I expected that the pro-Palestine crowd would just be awful and my side would be virtuous. But that was not the reality of what happened. So I think because the pro-Palestine crowd had dominated the news for the previous 10 days, that many people on the pro-Israel side came with a substantial chip on their shoulder and really wanted to get into it with the pro-Palestine crowd.
Yeah, I was struck by how, and there were, well, what am I trying to say? I was struck by this inter-ethnic conflict going on an American university campus. For one thing, it just seemed like bizarre what is going on. And then I realized that is like an island as well in the middle of basically like millions of Mexicans too, isn't it? So
yeah, I didn't see many Latinos nor many Asians participating in the campus protests.
Yeah. And on the Jewish side, there was a great deal of claiming persecution, I think. I heard lots of shrill middle-aged women standing up and crying about the anti-Semitism and won't somebody please think of the children and all this kind of stuff. Do you think that is a good approach to take, or is it just kind of natural?
Well, is it a good approach to take to whip up intense feeling among your in-group while leaving people outside of your in-group unmoved? Yeah, it probably, you can't go wrong telling your in-group that it's victimized. I mean, you can't go wrong in terms of your stock, your standing, your status with your in-group, or the comfort of your life, right? Life is so much easier, so much more pleasant, so much more comfortable when you have good standing with your in-group, and you can never lower your standing by telling your in-group how much it is persecuted and oppressed.
Yeah, you see, I was conflicted. I was thinking, is it a good idea for like these members of the Jewish community? And I think they had somebody from Israel there as well on the stage, some ambassador or whoever it was speaking. I heard an Israeli voice, and he was some official from Israel to speak. I was thinking, is this actually good for the people there at UCLA to whip them into supporting Israel? Now that this might be their natural proclivities, but there is this conflict going on over there. Of course, now we have Palestinian protesters coming out and, arguing for their side. But I was conflicted by what is the claim here going on the Jewish side? Is it that they are in fear of anti-Semitism on the campus, or is it that they need to whip up their own crowd to fervently support Israel? And the two don't seem to necessarily be the same thing. Am I making any sense?
Yes, and this is a disappointing realization that I've come to, Stephen J. James, and that is that there is no in-group identity without an accompanying sense of victimhood. So if your in-group identity is moderate, you're likely to only have a moderate sense of victimhood. But if you have an intense in-group identity, which has many adaptive functions, you're going to have an intense sense of victimhood. You can't have an intense, strong sense of in-group identity without an accompanying strong, intense feeling of victimhood. The two go together, and every single group in the world can think of itself as victims. Now, you want to have smart people running the show who have empathy, who have ability to distance themselves from these feelings of victimhood so that you can steer the group in a more productive direction. But I think most people are better off with a more intense in-group identity. Most people. Some people would be better off with a less intense in-group identity. But wouldn't you say, compared to someone with no sense of in-group identity and someone with, say, a moderate sense of in-group identity, that the people with the moderate sense of in-group identity are better off than the people with no sense of in-group identity?
Sure. Yes, I get it. I'm just thinking of like the welfare, the benefit to the people on the ground in at UCLA, on other college campuses, various Jews in America. I've heard you say in the past that when Israel is at war, you feel it as a Jew walking around.
Yes.
Because people are like, yeah, and even to the extent that, haven't you said in the past that, say, that certain rabbis will say, well, maybe it might not be the best idea to go around wearing your yarmulke or something, or try to blend in more, or don't overtly walk around maybe with the Israel flag, tied around your neck, at the very least that. Wouldn't that be a more sensible way to approach things, rather than whipping up these people who it's been claimed that they're vulnerable, they're under threat, therefore it seemed to be encouraging them to go out and over-identify not just as Jewish, but as Zionist, as Israel, is actively supporting Israel, when they might not actually necessarily, all of them, have been so inclined to do that.
Yeah, that which is sensible and that which is intense is usually opposite. Life is more pleasurable. Life is more fun when
that's true, yeah.
Things are intense, but intensity will usually diminish your clarity and good sense. But think about, say, the act of love. You can have a particularly intense act of love by, walking the erotic minefield, by following your love map, by, enacting your particular proclivities, and you get to have a highly intense act of love. but if you were to articulate what was going on for you, it wouldn't sound very sensible. So if you were about to go into a fight, being particularly amped up, being in a particularly intense state, will likely serve you as long as you're also able to make good decisions. But yeah, generally, life is better. You have more energy. You are happier when you're living life intensely. The downside to that is you usually make less sensible decisions. And on the other hand, life is usually better when your decisions are more sensible than less sensible. So you've got a dynamic that is going in opposite directions. Like the more passionate you are about anything, the less clearly you will see what's going on, right? The people who are most passionate about their spouse, right, their partner in the act of love, right, that intensity comes at the price of clarity. I know many ostensibly happily married people who believe that their spouse is like the greatest person in the world. When you look at the situation with just common sense, their spouse is not the greatest person in the world, but apparently marriages go better when you have an inflated sense of the greatness of your partner. And there are many untrue beliefs that seem to serve us. So I see a direction here with these type of in-group intense sense of victimhood rallies that you're going to increase the intensity of people's in-group identity, which will tend to act against the making sensible decisions. But it's not clear, which is more adaptive for people, because most people are better off living a more intense rather than a less intense life. At the same time, people are better off making sensible decisions rather than irrational decisions.
Yeah. No, I get it. I'm also, I'll just say, am I the only one who's suspicious about some of these protests? Could they be organized? Could these protests in a way be being stirred up as like problem, reaction, solution, create a problem to kind of knock them on the head? Has anybody else had any suspicions about any of this, perhaps?
Yeah, they are organized. I mean, there's a uniformity to these protests. There's a pattern to these protests. They set up camps. They make demands. They take over public space. They prevent the normal functioning of a college campus to further their demands and to attract media attention. So it may not necessarily be that this is hierarchically run, but they're all singing from the same hymn book. And generally speaking, if your in-group is singing from the same hymn book, you have higher esprit de corps, you have higher morale, you're going to be more effective in life, because generally speaking, a group strategy is going to win out over an individualist strategy.
Yeah, you used a word there that I don't know what that means. What's that? Esprit de corps?
Esprit de corps means morale. Okay. About morale for people it's usually used with regard to the military.
Okay. And so who were the Palestinian protesters then? What group of people? Is it just obviously Muslims, or were there loads of like white liberals?
Yeah, so here I've got a definition of esprit de corps. It's esprit de corps is a feeling of loyalty and pride that is shared by the members of a group who consider themselves to be different from other people in some special ways. So synonyms are solidarity, rapport, team spirit, and camaraderie. So who were the pro-Palestine protesters? So they are certainly younger than the pro-Israel crowd on average. They are swarthier on average. They seem to be largely Arabs, Muslims, people from the Middle East, but there are some Jews in their midst who don't agree with Zionism or don't agree with the current manifestation of Zionism in the state of Israel. And there are some white people also on their side, but it does look to be dominantly a Middle East group.
I was not suspicious. I want to completely disagree with something Khalid was saying. It was way earlier on in the show. Where he was saying that,
my friend, Khalid,
yes, or whatever. Yes. Anyway, what he was saying was, I had it on your Twitter. You were something about that these are. It's not necessarily right or left. What was he saying? What was he
Yes,
saying?
I will give you the exact quote that it's not Muslims
Sorry,
are not right. There's not a left-right divide when it comes to Palestine, as Muslims are a large percentage of those protesters, and Muslims are right-wing, according to being family-oriented. So I don't believe that Muslims in the United States
It's
or the
just
United Kingdom.
bollocks, isn't it?
I don't
Exactly.
believe in pragmatic political exact terms that is correct. I believe that Muslims predominantly in the West vote for the parties of the center left and left.
Yes,
But
it's
but
just
they are
absolute
opposed to gay
bollocks.
marriage and trans stuff.
But not on a political level. They are not politically active on the right wing whatsoever. Not in our countries. In their own countries, they are. But they get over here and almost exclusively they are left wing agitators. And so I don't know how to square that circle, Luke, as to what to think about that. Now, I'm sure what you'll probably want to tell me is that they're just being smart people advocating for their own best interests, and it's in their best interest when they get over here to agitate for the left wing, which affords them immigrant rights and that. But how would somebody like Khalid, therefore tell me though that these are a right wing people? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Right, probably because he has some sympathies with he has considerable sympathies for what are considered traditional values, and Khalid is not normally talking in the terms that say academics would talk. He talks in terms of apologetics, of making a case for. So rather than precisely describing reality, he articulates a presentation of reality that is more alignment with how he would like to see the world as opposed to how the world actually is. That's my understanding of Khalid's rhetoric.
This is the problem I have with specific Muslims. Not all Muslims, because I live in the UK and that might be hate speech. But don't you feel that when you're talking to a Muslim, 9 times out of 10, it feels like you're talking to somebody who has a party political affiliation, and they have to walk the party line.
Yes, there doesn't seem to be nearly as much.
It's so frustrating, isn't
diversity.
it? So frustrating.
Yeah. In fact, I know many rabbis who have given up on dialogue with Muslims. Rabbis who are overall quite predisposed to interreligious dialogue, but they've given up on dialogue with Muslims because it always comes down to Muslims just handing out proof texts saying, there must be no compulsion in the matter of religion, etc. That there is the same sort of rhetoric that Khalid gave.
And there's so many excuses which come down to like textual cope or like textual like legal getting out clauses and things which they use. Like it's quite clear that the history of Islam is what has been one of conquest, certainly from the early days. So like I just, for instance, threw out a quote because Khalid was saying, what a wonderful, peaceful, benign force Islam has been, and never done anybody any wrong, didn't do nothing. And so from my understanding, I'd heard somebody talking about this a while ago, about how Muhammad himself expelled pretty much the entire Arabian Peninsula who refused to convert. And so you can quite quickly like look this up, get a quote, and see that in many sources, I mean, the story is widely told about this happening. And so you can get a quote of something Muhammad said. For instance, I will certainly expel Jews and Christians from the peninsula until I leave none but Muslims. And Khalid will come back and say, you really shouldn't just trust any old sources and stick to the Quran and things like this. And it just seems like such political weaselness. Why can't they just stand up for it, Luke?
There is no non-fundamentalist Islam, right? There is no there is no Islamic denomination that does not hold that God gave the Quran, that every word of the Quran comes from God. So you have extensive secular critical study of the Jewish Bible, the Christian Bible, and you have extensive study of the Quran, looking at it as a human document. But there are no denominations with Islam that aren't fundamentalists, that don't use as their foundation that every single word of the Quran came from God. So that makes this kind of dialogue much more difficult. And if people are interested, there's a scholar by the name of Aaron W. Hughes, who's a scholar of both Judaism and Islam. And he wrote a terrific book called Theorizing Islam. And he notes, this was one paragraph here: when one permits those whom one studies to define the terms in which they will be understood, suspends one's interest in the temporal and the contingent, or fails to distinguish between truth claims and regimes of truth, one has ceased to function as a historian or scholar. So you then have a variety of roles available to you. You can be perfectly respectable as a friend or advocate. You can be a cheerleader, a voyeur, a retailer of import goods. None, however, should be confused with scholarship. So scholars of religion have largely tended to look upon their departmental colleagues who specialize in Islam with bewilderment and bemusement, because those who are supposedly scholars of Islam in Western universities are overwhelmingly apologists for Islam as opposed to scholars.
Yeah. And the other thing that you always hear is the moment that you try to contradict anything that you say, you try to use their own books against them, or their own sayings not against them, but you try to say, well, what about this one? What about this one? Well, there inevitably comes back at you. Well, you don't even speak Arabic, so shut up. You can't even say anything. And even somebody like Khalid can't speak Arabic himself. Even he is relying upon translations, and will probably be like we saw earlier. He admitted he gets bullied by the bigger Muslims, I guess. The Arabic-speaking Muslims who think that they are more devout, more true, who have the closer connection to truth than he does. But yeah, I always feel like I'm talking to a party political member when I'm speaking to a Muslim, and it's so frustrating.
Right. That's why many people have just given up on trying to have dialogue with Muslims, because there is that frustration that you just articulate. I mean, how are you going to talk about things with someone who takes it as a foundational principle that every word of their religious document comes from God? I mean, how do you argue against God or critique God? It verges on the impossible.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, moving on. So I had a few notes here that I was going to talk to you about. So we'll move on from that then. The other thing, I heard, these are totally disparate topics, Luke, but I did hear Elliot Blatt on your show. It was great to hear Elliot Blatt come on the other day again, of course, reporting from San Francisco. But one of the things he did say was his consternation with the fact that the United States and Western governments continue to fund the war in Ukraine, and he said he could not fathom essentially why it's going on, and he asked you, do you kind of know why? And so I wanted to put across the idea why it might be in Americans' interest. I'm not trying to shill for the Ukrainians or anything like that. It often comes across like this, but somebody explained to me that the reason why, if it is at all in Americans' interest to fund this war in the Ukraine, which is something like, I don't know, 1 or 2% of American military spending per year, then the reason is not so much that it is absolutely necessary that the Ukrainians win the local conflict, but it is more about this grander scale of geopolitics, which would, like the old world order, would fall apart if the Russians were allowed to roll over Ukraine how they wanted to, without being stopped, and this would like bring down the old order and signal more worse to China that they could therefore just roll into Taiwan unopposed. And so it is more about preventing like the Third World War and saving this old order. I'm doing this terrible job of explaining it.
No, I get it completely. You can sum it up in 3 words: rule-based order.
Yes, this is it. So yes, you could maybe articulate what I've just said even better to Elliot, I suppose.
That the nations supporting Ukraine say we need a rule-based international order, and if we allow Russia or any nation to get away with swallowing a substantial portion of another nation, we are endangering the rule-based order, and we are creating incentives for more nations to go ahead and swallow other nations if they feel like they can get away with it. So we have to engage in the equivalent of broken window policing. We have to stop this right at the beginning so that other nations are not encouraged to go out and swallow their neighbors.
And this makes absolute sense to me. When somebody explained this to me, I understand it. And I even understand that horrible quote, which when I heard come out of Lindsey Graham's mouth, it disgusted me, Luke. When I heard Lindsey Graham say, he heard somebody said, like, thousands of Russians are dying or something. And Lindsey Graham said, it's the cheapest money we've ever spent. And
so
like that. And I thought that was disgusting, I thought, but now I get it.
Right, because, I mean, that's a different argument than for the rules. There's a different component to that argument. You're arguing then that dollar for dollar, this is a cheap and efficient way of degrading one of America's biggest geostrategic rivals. That for every $1 billion we send to Ukraine,
or of maintaining that rules-based order.
Right, not just maintaining the rules-based order. This is a different argument. This is degrading a rival. We are bleeding the rival. It's like funding the North Vietnamese so that they can kick American ass, or funding those opposed to the American occupation of Afghanistan and Iraq. So you are funding those who are weakening your enemy without suffering any loss of life on your side. It's kind of like America sitting out the bloodiest portions of World War I and World War II, and then sweeping in at the end to gain the biggest advantage at the lowest price.
Exactly. Yes. So when it sounds disgusting on the face of it when somebody says something like that. And it even brings into perspective that evil quote. Wow, I sound like an absolute fucking neocon here, but it even brings into perspective when you think about like what the evil bitch, I suppose, Madeleine Albright was actually thinking when she said, like, yes, it was worth 1 million Iraqi children or something. I can actually understand the mindset of what they were actually getting at now. Whereas before, I was completely polarized against it. I couldn't understand it. I thought, how could anybody say something so, wicked? But,
well, people have incentives, and these incentives don't always align with what sounds morally palatable or what even sounds morally acceptable. But if the facts on the ground are that it's in your interest if something horrible happens to someone else, that's still a fact on the ground. Generally speaking, people and nations do conduct themselves in alliance with their own best interests, even if it sounds immoral. They then just use their cognitive resources to try to reframe what is horrible as really the moral upstanding thing.
Yeah. So, that's the reason that I am convinced that if an American wants an answer as to why 1 or 2% of the American military budget is being spent upon this conflict in the Ukraine, it is to keep in place, whatever you might think of it, this status quo that has kept the world in relative peace, kind of, since the Second World War, with America as the policeman of the world. Nobody else can do it. Nobody else can do it. You might oppose it. You might think that being a neocon and neoconservatism and American, whatever the word is, extensionism around the world is a terrible thing, and many people do, but it is a status quo that has persisted for some time. And I certainly, and certainly many the people who are deciding to go in and support Ukraine, I think are quite rightly terrified of what comes after that system falling apart, that system crumbling apart, where like China becomes ascendant, realizes that America isn't going to be this policeman in the world, and Russia realizes that, and this is a much less, this is a much more terrifying future than if we just, pile hundreds of billions of dollars into Ukraine and make sure everybody in the world realizes that no, things actually are going to be enforced as they have been for the last few decades.
Now, there's still, I do see some legitimacy to those arguments. I would disagree with them because I believe the price that we are paying, the disaster that will come from this unnecessary conflict with Russia will outweigh the benefits. So that's where I stand.
Fair income. So moving on then, I have one more thing I wanted to talk about, and that is, I know that you have been a long Bitcoin disrespecter, haven't you, Luke?
Yes.
Yes. Well, I once told you a story about how I was a Bitcoin kid, basically. So if anybody doesn't know, back in the day, I used to play with these Bitcoins as if they were just like tokens they were like some gambling games on the internet. I was very young. I came across this. I think I initially got something like, I don't know, 25 English pounds or something. And I bought some with like one of my parents' credit cards or something, consensually. But then I used to use them as like tokens on there were games on the internet you could play. It was effectively gambling, but because I was too young to gamble at the time, this enabled this to happen. It wasn't really money at the time; they were just like tokens in a game. And this is now like over a decade ago, and I probably, through my hands at some point, probably went, I'm not joking, thousands of Bitcoins.
Wow.
Playing with them in these games. And so I have this, and so I have this problem that I had wallets at the time, and I was sure like I had Bitcoin sat around that I could possibly be able to get access to, and I've never been able to do this because they're like, some of them were on websites that have gone defunct, some of them are passwords that just can't be accessed, and so I literally have no idea what could be there and what couldn't. But I actually was able. Sorry, I'm having a problem with my mic. I was able to access a wallet with some in, right? Only a small amount. It was like a few $1,000s, but it was there, right? I've finally managed to find some of this, what now in today's world is actually money, and wow, it's worth a few $1,000s, under $5,000. So I went to the trouble of attempting to then turn this into real money, and this process is an absolute nightmare. It's almost impossible. So first you have to send it to an exchange. You have to register at an exchange. This takes an enormous amount of time because these things are registered now. They're under regulation. You have to send in multiple forms of identity, passport, driving license, utility bills. You have to video yourself on on your mobile phone and look left and look right and up and down and all these kinds of identity procedures, and then you get to sell your bitcoins, less than a bitcoin, but on the exchange, get your few $1,000s, and you're like, aha, finally, I've solved this riddle and finally got an access to a little bit of money, about $4,000, and then click the withdraw button, and then wait, it says okay, pending, and then like the next day you get a notice from this exchange saying you now need to prove the source of this wealth. And like, well, it was over a decade ago. I've no idea where I got these. I can't prove, it was a decade ago. How am I supposed to prove how I got these coins? And something known as know your customer rules mean that unless you can prove exactly how you acquired these coins, then they're not going to fucking give me the money. So
did you research? Did you Google the problem and see how other people had surmounted it?
Yeah. And well, currently it's pending, and it's been pending for 6 weeks that this money is sat there on this exchange due to its money laundering compliance and it's called KYC rules, know your customer rules, where exchanges, certainly for the UK, are required. You have to prove the source of the wealth in order for them to release the money to you, to know that you are basically not a money launderer or a terrorist. And so they've asked, like, it's gone back and forth now about 5 times with saying we need more information from you. We need, asking me more and more questions, and now it's just sat there in limbo, and I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to extract it. So the reason I'm telling you this, Luke, anyway, this long story, is I just thought it would be useful for people to hear.
Yeah, this
really is a fucking scam.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah,
It's an absolute nightmare.
I suspect that it's easier to get funds in the United States, or at least it used to be easier to get Bitcoin funds. I'm not particularly up on this area. It's just that from my limited amount of reading on this topic, I just didn't see where Bitcoin met legitimate needs more effectively than other alternatives. And so the kind of nightmare you just described is a large part of why I turned against cybercurrencies once I did a little bit of investigation, I think about 3 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. This could be a peculiarity with like the strict UK financial regulations. I admit this fully, but there was no other way for me to go about it. I wasn't going to use some kind of black market service, and I have nothing to hide. Legitimately, I was a kid about a decade ago playing with these things. I managed to access a wallet. There's about $4,000 there. I'm just trying to turn it into real money. So I've gone down the right, I've done it the right way. We'll see if I get it, but it also made me realize as well, another thing that people don't realize with these cryptos is the danger of losing it. And certainly for somebody like me with ADHD, like these things are not backed by any kind of insurance or anything like that. If you have to entirely trust that in a few years' time, if you put all your money into something like a crypto, into a Bitcoin, and you take excessive measures to like protect it, you have to rely upon like that in 5 years' time, you will be able to access it all, and that all the steps that you've gone through to like secure it won't lock you out of it in like 5 years' time. And it's not insured, it's not protected in any way. You can't get it back if somebody steals it, or you can't ask somebody to unlock it for you if you forgot your password, or it just doesn't work, or the website's gone when you come back to it, or any of this stuff. So it's an incredibly risky thing.
Yeah, it's why I'm against cybercurrencies. But I think more importantly for you, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this lack of keeping track of your financial resources, including your bitcoins, your lack of organization and paperwork, is not just something that is reflected in this latest Bitcoin difficulty, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say that this one symptom and this one isolated part of your life pervades your life and has consistently held you back from moving ahead in life, as opposed to someone who's able to sustain attention to detail.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure absolutely that plays a lot into it. I do wonder, with the Bitcoin thing specifically, though, if I hadn't have had ADHD. I mean, at the time, I couldn't I couldn't have known that it would become worth literally $70,000 per coin when I was like using, 20 of them per time to play a game with.
But there were people who believed that and who took the time to make the notes that they would need to be able to cash out in case Bitcoin skyrocketed. And those people aren't just more successful in this one narrow transaction. These are people who are much more successful in life overall. This is like our problems are never just our problems. They're just symptoms of much deeper problem, like an inability to display adequate consideration for ourselves, let alone other people. And Elliot Platts, go ahead.
Sorry, not just that. If only, Luke, you know as well as I do that ADHD is about. I'm sure everybody's sick of us blaming everything on ADHD by now. By the way,
who cares? We will speak the truth, even if it's unpopular. Here I stand.
Exactly. Yes. But you and I both know. I'm sure that deadlines matter, and normal people can abide by like deadlines and getting things done in the right, like in a timely manner. But if you're ADHD and you can like avoid something, then you can just let that slide and just leave it there. And if only I'd have bothered to think about this, Luke, when I knew that Bitcoin was like worth $1,000, which was sometime like around, I don't know what, about 8 years ago. If only I'd have like got my head out of my arse and thought about this back then it would have been much, much easier to probably find some of it. Who knows? I could be sat on like $1 million or something now.
Yeah.
Instead.
Exactly. Your lack of an adaptive level of consideration for yourself in taking care of these details may well have cost you, let's say it cost you $1 million in this matter, but it also has cost you countless amounts of money and the good things of life. Aside from this is just one manifestation. And so occasionally forgetting things is not a medical disorder, Elliot Blatt says. My point is that occasionally forgetting something is sometimes a symptom of a much deeper problem. And sometimes these deeper problems are most effectively dealt with as a medical disorder. Sometimes they're not most effectively dealt with as a medical disorder. Sometimes occasionally forgetting something has absolutely no meaning. But in my life experience, people who forget things that cost them tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of dollars, this isn't just a one-time thing. This is a persistent problem in life that they don't take a normal level of consideration for their own best interests, let alone other people's best interests.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that forgetting is part of ADHD. I'm not really forgetful, I don't think. It's knowing that there's something there that needs to be done, that you can do, but you can get away with not doing it. It's not disaster won't befall you if you just leave that thing undone. And then like, whoa, a decade's passed and I haven't done anything about it, and now I'm fucked. Now I'm utterly. Whoa, I mean, if only I'd realised this like 6 or 7 years ago and like had a go at doing something about it, where maybe like websites were still there or things could still be accessed, or like the computers that I used weren't fucking Windows 7 or whatever, and now even if I stick the hard drives in another computer, they just come up error and all this kind of stuff, and you just like realize, wow, I leave things to the very deadline that, like, until I know that the consequences are right upon my head, and then I have a look and see if anything could be done about it, and it's often too late.
Yeah, the chat says, we're just crying over spilt milk. Well, sometimes crying over spilt milk is the best way to go, because the more intensely you feel the loss, the more likely you are to do something about this sort of situation going forward. The more blithely you dismiss the loss, the less likely you are to do something about this going forward. Is that fair?
Sure. Look, I'll be absolutely blunt. I'm not crying over the spilt milk of the Bitcoins the Bitcoin millionaire I could maybe be if I only had access to these wallets that I used to play games with as a child. I've come to accept it. I've come to terms with it. In fact, in a way, the ADHD allows me to not actually, beat myself up about it. I can kind of just let it be, in a way that other people would now be furiously searching through all this stuff. There are even people who, they've heard me tell these stories and they've contacted me and said, look, I will help you. Search for this stuff. And I'm like, no, I just need to let it. I just need to let it go. And I actually can just let it go, because it's not good for me to search. Yes, I've put a bit of effort into it, because suddenly Bitcoin's turned out to be worth like $70,000, and it was the time to try and find out if there was anything worth salvaging there. But
so I'm reading this book, Why We Change and 10 Reasons Why We Don't, and the author Ross Ellenhorn makes the point that the primary reason that we do successfully change is that we have contemplated something, we have come to terms with the price of what we're doing, and we see the benefits of doing something differently, and that this internal directed change is the most effective type of change. And I think that's apropos here. I think we are better off when we try to learn from these mistakes and problems and losses, as opposed to just blithely dismissing them. Doesn't mean that you curl into a ball and don't leave the house for a month. But I think that there is a good adaptive case to be made for intensely feeling the loss, all the dimensions of the loss, and then constructing a more adaptive path forward.
Absolutely. Anyway, I wanted to tell that tale because I do imagine that there are so many people who certainly have probably bought into the Bitcoin craze over the last few years, certainly over the last few months. Sadly, when Bitcoin goes to a high, I'm not too black-pilled on it as a concept and stuff. I just think it's terribly risky, and my story really does explain how you could possibly be the holder of it, and you have to think in 5 or 10 years' time when I'm coming to realize this wealth. It's not like stocks or money in a bank, which is somewhat secured, and you'll definitely be able to access again. It's an extremely risky thing. It's yeah, I wouldn't do it, and certainly. Well, that's probably enough of the story, to be honest.
Well, what are you taking away from this for your own life? Nothing? You're just going to move on? Or is there something to be learned that you want to apply going forward?
So I've come to a few of these realizations, actually. One of the things I used to listen to, this is a bit different, but I used to buy into all this bullshit about taking your privacy really serious on the internet. You hear this everywhere. So I was one of these people who was convinced by these privacy bros that were always telling you Google is spying on you and Apple spies on you, and all this, and this is really serious. So you need to use like VPNs, you need to turn off the backup on your phone and everything. And so I was one of these people. I thought, yeah, this all makes sense. I don't want the companies to spy on me. And this all came crashing down around a year ago when I was running out of work, and I smashed my phone on the ground, and I couldn't get it to. It was just totally destroyed, and I suddenly realised, well, I don't have a backup of literally anything. And so at that point, I realised, no, I have to rely upon the tools that are out there. I actually have to I have to stop believing bullshit that people feed me, that it's for my, that these levers and like things that are put there in society, and these tools that other people rely on and make good use of for reliability, I actually should put my reliance into them. And so from that point on, I've become much more trusting of these things. I look around, bad things aren't happening to other people. My friends' doors aren't being put through by the police because they've said naughty words on the internet, or they've visited like right-wing websites or anything like this. Or I actually can rely upon the normie things that are out there much more than I realised to take care of the things. So now I've turned on like the backup on my phone, and I use Google Photos for all my photos, and I'm not worried about institutions looking at my photos, because at the end of the day, I'm not doing anything wrong. So that is something that I've taken away. I don't know if that answers the question. Look,
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful, and there are broader applications of this. That not only do you want to be appropriately skeptical, you don't want to be inappropriately skeptical. Right, so normies, we may criticize them for not being skeptical enough about this or that, but sometimes normies are right, and you can have too much skepticism of what a doctor tells you. For example, I was friends with this woman in Orthodox Jewish life who was very much into natural healing. Okay, all well and good, but when she got a bowel cancer diagnosis, right, she didn't follow medical direction. Instead, she tried to heal through natural means, and she was dead shortly thereafter. I suspect that she would have lived more comfortably and longer and more productively if she'd followed medical direction. So I am all for doing research on what doctors tell you, but I'm not for automatically dismissing what doctors tell you because you have these theories about natural healing.
Yeah, I think that was similar actually to Steve Jobs, who he got cancer and he believed literally that he could cure it by like drinking apple juice or something. Yes. It's not a laughing matter, but even like the smartest, richest people of the world can be fooled into this utter bullshit.
I mean, often doctors will give an important diagnosis, such as you have bowel cancer, to someone, and people will be inappropriately skeptical of what the doctor tells them. So, yeah, there's a downside to having no skepticism to what your priest, your doctor, your dentist, or your accountant tells you, but there's also a tremendous downside to being overly skeptical.
Yeah, and on some level, it is best to hand over like your agency for making these decisions to people who have the professional capacity and the years of experience to make these decisions for you, rather than you relying upon like the your internet research or what the bros in the chat have recommended.
Yeah, like if you go to a doctor in California for certain consultations, the doctor is legally required to ask you if you have guns in the house. Right. So to me, that's insane and does not belong in a medical consultation. But because the doctor is required to ask you a question, which I think is inappropriate, doesn't mean you then dismiss the rest of what they have you do.
Yeah. It's interesting. I see in the chat, Disco Burner, I think, is sensing, wow, we've got a potential we've got a potential kid here who can see the future, and if he's probably thinking, I am not an ADHDer, so all I need is a financial tip from SJJ here, and I could go and invest in it. And so I do actually have some. I'll tell you what I'm going to do with my money if I get it. I'm going to This is not financial advice. But if I get it, I'm going to stick it on a couple of stocks, actually, and try and take some risk. I've actually been researching investing in the stock market and things like this. You don't have to answer, Luke. Do you invest in the stock market?
I don't invest in individual stocks. Because I'm 57. If I was in my 20s,
I get it.
Yeah, in my 20s, I'd be more adventurous.
Absolutely. Well, I've begun to learn about stocks and investing in stocks, and so I'm guessing that you have some investments. You'd have to confirm or deny that you have some investments in a passive index fund or a portfolio that's a mixture of index funds and bonds or something like that.
Yeah, very conservative, modest amounts of investment. So I invested in an I bond where you're guaranteed from the U.S. Treasury a rate of return that exceeds inflation.
Understandable, yeah. So, but somebody my age should be looking to maybe take some risks. Certainly, if I've just get a bit of money that I can just dump onto something that I didn't have yesterday, I'm at a position where I'm more able to take a risk with it, and so I'm gonna dump it all, probably on two stocks, which would be Rocket Lab and Palantir, if I'm going to dump it all on, and then I can get in before they go to the moon, which is my prediction. Which one says Disco Burner? Rocket Lab, RKLB, and Palantir, PLTR. But don't take that as financial advice. But that's what I'm going to do with my money. 100x coming soon.
And it is part of your thinking here that you want a source of excitement in your life, and seeing these stocks bounce up and down is going to provide you with excitement.
Well, part of that, but also I was never taught about investing. I was never taught about the stock market. They didn't teach this in schools. None of my friends ever told me about it. I've had to I know it sounds stupid, but I've had to discover this thing for myself, that it's a thing, and that somebody like me, I think it's known in the game as a retail investor, can just turn up to something like eToro or Invest Engine or something like that on the internet and just buy fractions of stocks with even $10 if you've got it. And so, and then I've decided to become more sensible about it and research it, and I've learned all about passive index funds, so putting money on the S&P 500 or an emerging market ETF and all this kind of stuff. I'm finding it absolutely fascinating. In fact, if anybody is interested in this stuff, I know lots of people in your chat. I know you've got a few financial bros in there I've seen in the past. I don't know if they're in now, who'll know far much more than I do. But I'm finding it interesting learning about it. There is a YouTuber on the internet who's actually an exciting guy. He does really good content called Patrick Boyle.
Yes.
Boyle. He is a former hedge fund manager, and he's really funny as well. And so I've been just watching Patrick Boyle videos and loads of this. But my research isn't limited to that. I've also been reading about financial markets and stuff, and realizing that what I do need to do is I do need to start saving for the future now. I'm at that stage where I really do need to start doing that. Whilst also I'm aware that I'm at that age where I can take some risks. So, and that really, somebody like me who is not a high earner, I mean a minimum earner, the only way that I would be able to have huge positive finances in the future is if I do take some gambles that pay off. So
okay, let me challenge that.
Yes.
So you said the only way that you're going to be financially set is if you take some gambles, and I would challenge you that a more likely way that you will be in a good financial position is if you learn to adjust your ego to serving the priorities of an employer?
Yeah, but you know the problem with that, Luke. First, I have to find one. Then I have to be good at be able to. It's not easy. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunities for somebody like me, so that's easy to say. But even if I find another employer, I mean, I have to ask who is going to employ me with a high earning position to do what? This is like an insurmountable task to just try and come up with. Who is going to employ somebody unskilled with a high wage or something like this? So I don't see a route to high earning employment at the moment, is what I'm trying to say. So my income is almost certainly going to be low, probably for the next decade or something like that.
And do
I'm
you
just being
have
realistic?
do you have any personality issues with being of service to an employer? Are you willing to subjugate your own whims and your own ego to meeting the priorities of an employer?
Oh, absolutely. If I could earn good money, or there was a route towards it, absolutely. But
So how quickly would you have to get rewards before you're willing to subject yourself to the priorities of an employer?
well, not super quickly. I'm not somebody who. The implication behind what you're saying is that I could just go and find some other job, Luke. That I could end up on a path to higher earning, but it's not as simple as that for something like me. I think what you're doing is showing your privilege of being high IQ. To be honest, I'm not going to lie here. I think you're underestimating what the position that somebody like me is in for really what I can offer.
No, I think what I'm doing is pointing out that it is our character, it is our personality, it is our inclination to be of service to other people. If you have an attitude of wanting to be of appropriate levels of service to others, so don't be overly serving others in an inappropriate way, but adjust your priorities to those of an employer and to facilitate your relationships, help other people moderately, that if you have an effective mindset where you're happy to subjugate your own whims and personality to that of an employer and to make your employer's interest your interest, that type of personality is highly likely to have a successful life. The same type of personality will take a spouse's interest into account, will take a friend's interest into account, will take his community's interests into account. And so someone who is able to subjugate himself to his own greater good by taking other people appropriately into account is going to be much more set for success in life, while someone who does not take his employer's interests into account, someone who does not take a spouse's interests into account or his community's interests into account or extended family's into account and just does what he wants, is doomed to a life of failure.
But how do I manifest this into higher earning is the question. I mean, explain it to me like I'm stupid, Luke. I mean, I do have a job at the moment. I'm good at it. I'm well valued. Management love me. I'm useful. But at the end of the day, in 10 years' time, it's still only going to pay the equivalent of a McDonald's wage. Is the problem.
Right. So what's the most common critical feedback that you've received over the course of your life? Not just in the workplace, but in general. Or you can use a friend. You can say, a friend, I know this guy, and the most common critical feedback he's received is this.
I don't know. Maybe that I'm. I don't know. I honestly don't know. To be honest, I honestly don't know. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? That might be that I'm oblivious to feedback. Actually, Luke, is that the point that you're making? Maybe
I
oblivious
don't know, but it does sound on the surface as though you're oblivious to feedback. But for every piece of critical feedback that you or I have received, there have been 20 times as many examples of the behavior that people are objecting to, but most people just can't be bothered to call us out for the crap that we're doing. But if we are taking into account other people, for example, I'm thinking of one friend. He's got a very loud motorcycle, and when he starts up his motorcycle in a cul-de-sac, everybody in that cul-de-sac is bothered by it. And I tried to talk him into wheel your motorcycle out of the cul-de-sac and then start it so that you cause less disruption to the lives of people around you. And so that's an example of taking other people into account. So when you take other people into account, you're just much happier and much more successful in life. Another way of posing the question I posed to you is, what are examples when you've received the most humiliation? Because when we don't take other people into appropriate levels of account, we will inevitably be absolutely humiliated.
Yeah, the problem. I get your psychoanalyzing. The problem is I just don't see how. Maybe. Look, the biggest criticism that I've ever had, is that I'm stupid, that I'm low IQ, that that I'm an idiot.
Okay.
This is the thing that I've gone. And I'm acutely aware that I'm not as smart as everybody else. Now I can fake it for a bit. I can, but not. I can prepare a few talking points and come on a live stream and maybe sound somewhat articulate for a little while. But
what you're saying is that you're consistently coming across to people who know you well as a moron.
Probably, yeah.
And how much success do you think you're going to have in life as long as you persist in the behavior and words that lead people to think you're a moron?
No, I get it, but what I'm afraid of, Luke, is that I actually am the more I'm a moron. This is the problem. This is the danger.
No, you're not really afraid of that. You're afraid of the pain of changing, and so you're using the cover that maybe I am really a moron, because the painful truth is that it would require some painful changes that would involve admitting that some of the things you've done in the past were wrong and not suited for your best interests. So you've got this ready-made excuse, maybe I am a moron, because you don't want to change, you don't want to grow, you really don't want to improve the quality of life because you're so comfortable with where you are now, and trying to create something different is way too scary, and so you use the cover, maybe I am just a moron. Because I guarantee you've got an IQ north of 120.
Oh, come off it. I don't think that's true. I don't think I can. I'm always well, yeah. Anyway, yeah.
What do you think? What do you think your IQ is?
I know, I'm probably 100 or something.
I guarantee you it's north of 115. The average university graduate has a 115 IQ, and I think that you're more intelligent than the average university graduate. And you are dramatically underachieving in life.
Well, that'd be a shock if that was the case. Over here they don't do IQ tests.
Well, you can take free ones online very easily.
Yeah, I've done some of those, Luke, and let me tell you about those. So I've done a few of those, and each time I've done them, I've spent about 40 minutes getting to the end, and then it says to me, now you have to pay for it. And I think, what an absolute moron I've been. I've fallen for one of these tricks, and it's just like this is like obvious proof that I am an idiot, that I've fallen for one of these fucking scams. So it's not been a good experience, to be honest.
Okay, let's do one right now. It's the reverse digit test. So I'm going to give you 5 digits, and I'd like you to repeat them back to me in reverse order.
No way.
Okay.
Don't.
Okay, here we go.
Oh my God, no.
6, 8, 1, 4, 3.
3, 4, 1, 8, 6.
Okay, so you have an IQ of at least 100. So I'm going to write down 6 digits this time.
No, we're going to fail. We're going to fail. No, don't do it live on air. Oh my god.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you 6 digits, so don't write them down. Just try to remember them in your head.
Yep.
7, 2, 3, 9, 5, 1.
1, 5, 9, 3, 2, 7.
Okay, so you've got an IQ that's at a minimum 115.
Was that? No way I got that right.
Yes.
Oh my god.
6 digits in reverse order. You've got a minimum IQ of 115.
Well, I'll take it under advisement. I'm still suspicious, but yeah.
What would
Anyway,
what
that
would
doesn't
be the implications if you had an IQ north of 120? How would that change your self-assessment and how you lived your life?
Well, I'm not sure that I could actually turn it into, like manifest it into higher earning, is the issue. So this is a conundrum. Obviously, I feel like I've got, a few years to figure this out.
What if you didn't?
Possible? And
What if you didn't? What if the decisions you make over the next 12 months will forever shape the course of your life?
I'm putting all my money on Rocket Lab in that case. I'm joking. I'm going all in on Rocket Lab to the moon.
Why not go all in on Stephen J. James?
Yeah. The problem is, of course, when you get to my age, is you don't have the qualifications, you don't have the experience of doing other jobs like this. Like, I do have a job, and but it's working as a lifeguard at a pool, which isn't really very prestigious, and literally there's not really any advancement. So, and yeah. Anyway, look, this is a conundrum. You've left me with something to think about, Luke.
Okay.
I question your IQ test, I've got to be honest. So,
Okay, research reverse digit IQ test. If you want.
It was really hard. That was really hard. Does it matter that it was extremely hard and I probably just fluked it?
Well, I'm sure you didn't fluke it, but you may be bumping up at your cognitive level. It might be like 7 digits might be your limit. Like, my IQ's consistently tested in the 120s, more often in the low 120s rather than the high 120s. So my IQ is around 6 digits to 7 digits as well.
Right. Next time I come on, I'll